worship the God who is. We worship the God who evermore will be. Well, he opened the prison doors. He parted the raging sea. My God, he holds the victory.
Okay, so this is first Sunday of 2024, and so let's jump in here, and let's start with this. It's kind of interesting how much access we have in the day in which 2024, the day in which we live. Not just access to information and data, but instant access to it. And what's also quite interesting about that is it hasn't necessarily made our lives easier in every regard, or more simple, and certainly not less stressful. In some ways, it surely has. My mom, I think about her from time to time, especially when I'm trying to remember some recipe, and I catch myself thinking, well, I'll call, oh, that's right, I can't. She's in heaven now. And so I'll look it up and find what someone else's mom has to say about a recipe, or GPS is really handy. Young people now will never know the misery of trying to fold one of those paper maps back together after trying to find out where you are, and then also like the do-it-yourself kind of information you can get off of the internet, and so in some ways it really in many ways it really is a blessing. Even now, I loathe YouTube and their parent company Google. I try to never use Google. I can't stand the kind of monopoly, the tyrannical grip they have on the access to information, the way that they shadow ban and outright ban users' content if it doesn't fall in line with their far left progressive ideology and agenda. And so, having said that, still, when it comes to like trying to figure out how to change the air cabin filter on a 2014 Subaru, I really do appreciate some of those YouTube videos. My wife really uses them, and largely because she knows if she figures out how to do it and starts to do it, it's going to motivate me to finally, be the man of the house that I should be. And so it's really worked out in many ways good for us. You try to assemble something that it seems like the instructions were either written by someone who was putting them together for an expert, or it was put together by someone who's never had any experience with said item, or it's just a sadist who finds a secret pleasure in knowing that somewhere out there he's creating and sowing seeds of misery. And so it's kind of nice. You can get a YouTube video, somebody who has a little experience with it, kind of walk you through the process and save you some time and some money and no small amount of sanity. And so we've never had this kind of access ever in the history of mankind to the amount of information and data. But with that, there's never been a time where I think we've been as perplexed about who to trust, who to believe, what to trust, what to believe. So we hear words now that have come into our vocabulary of fact checker and facts check. And rightfully so, because in many cases you need a fact check. In fact, what's become really obvious in our day is that you need fact checkers to check the fact checkers, because it turns out the fact checkers seem to have an agenda as well. And so there's this proliferation of sites, to check the fact checkers and check the facts, and so we're just bombarded with it. You got the Trump's Russian collusion, 3 or 4 or 5 years of that hoax, really. The insurrection and existential climate crisis. Now I'm hearing all over the place about UFO sightings and the suppression of information that the government had about UFOs, and then all this blatant censorship by the cabal of the big pharma. I mean, it's like I used to say in my youth, when I was about Andrew's age, I used to say, better living through chemicals. And now I'm thinking, I don't think these guys necessarily have our best interests at heart. Follow the money. And so you got this cabal of big pharma, big tech, big government, deep state kind of bureaucrats who are just desperate to cling on power and control. You hear about a great reset and critical race theory and gender and political theory, DEI, which should be DIE, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's like we're bombarded with data, with purported facts and information. He, she, him, her, they, them, not so fast. Heinz Processed Food Company, with its 130-year marketing claim of 57 varieties, has nothing on the 90-plus and counting genders and all the yet-to-be-named acceptable pronouns. Trust the science. Dr. Fauci is the science, he says. My body, my choice. Love is love. It's just there's so much data, so much information, so many truth claims that we're bombarded with. It leaves me feeling not unlike Lucille Ball's wife, Ricky Ricardo. It's like, ay. Ever felt like, ay. I don't know what to make of all this. In fact, many of us just want to turn it all off. Ay. So much information, so much data, so many truth claims. How do we know what to believe, who to believe, where to start? How does all this hold together? Does it even all hold together? Is there any coherent reality, some basis upon which to live my life, to believe what is true and not true, what is fact and what is fiction, what is right and what is wrong? And so the question is there such a foundation? And of course, we're in church, so you already know where I'm headed with this, right? You should, in our first talk of 2024. And even if you do, I think it is a really good reminder for you. And I think also we have to be careful here not to assume that just because we're in church, and I use that phrase, but this building isn't church, the church are God's people, but we're gathered as the church. Just because we are, to assume, you know what assume means, right? Did I mention we're in church? That's not what I'm referring to here. What I'm referring to here is just presupposing that because we're in church, everyone holds this same sense of what the basis for right and wrong and good and evil and truth is, that they're building their lives on that same foundation. It was about a decade ago now, Steve Elliott and Jenny did a good bit of the counseling here at the church. And I remember Steve coming to me and expressing some of his frustration and disillusionment with how many of the people who had come to seek counseling, either individual and or largely like couple counseling. He says it just astounds me how many of them lack just the basic understanding of a Christian or a biblical worldview. It's as if these concepts are completely alien to them, and they've come to me and they want to be fixed because their life is hurting, they're struggling. And he says, but man, it's they don't have a worldview that really is founded on God and His truth and what is really real. It's not as though they don't have a worldview, because everyone has a worldview, and that is a set of fundamental principles and beliefs that we hold about life, and some people refer to it as like the lens through which we view everything in life. We interpret everything in life, all of our experiences. It's how we think about God or think about ourselves or think about other people and their place in our lives and in the world and their value. It filters, it shapes everything. It shapes the expectation of the way things are in the real world or the way we think they ought to be, which would explain why so many of those couples that Steve was referring to struggled, because they were out of touch with the way reality actually is. And because of that, they're struggling. And And until they deal with those fundamental beliefs and presuppositions, it's like, we're kind of spinning our wheels because they don't realize that they have a worldview that just isn't going to produce the life that they want. And so everyone has a worldview, and yet people rarely, if ever, even think about what it is. What do I, at the bottom, at the core, at the foundation, believe to be true about God and myself and about other people and about life and eternity and death and struggles in life? How do I view all of that? Most people don't stop to think about, well, what is it at the bottom? What do I believe about those things? There's a proverb, Chinese proverb, I believe, and it goes like this: if you want to know what water is like, don't ask a fish. And the point of it is that water is the sum and substance of a fish's world. And they don't think about it. It's just it's the reality in which they are immersed. And they really don't think about it until they somehow end up belly up, flopping around and struggling for life itself, a fish out of water. And so many of us, I think we can relate to the angst that Steve expressed in that counseling of people who really don't know what their worldview, and if they did, at the base, they'd find out it's really not a biblical or a Christian worldview. Some of us know what that's like because we have people in our lives that we care about who are doing destructive things, destructive to themselves, destructive to other people, and it's like we try to get them to change, and we try, and we try, and we try, and then finally in exasperation we find ourselves, throwing up our hands many times saying, well, you can't fix stupid. I mean, it's crazy. They just keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. That's crazy. That's foolish, and it is foolish. So why do we do it? Why do people do that? And I think it's because their underlying assumption is off kilter about how life really works, what's really valuable, what's really true, what's really worth pursuing, and what should be avoided. And Proverbs, top of your talk notes, says the way of the fool seems right to him. I mean, they're not even that mindful of that way, but they're just so immersed in it, and it seems like the way to live life. Why isn't this working? Which is why at the heart of this religious-sounding word and biblical word, repent, that gets a bad rap, which means turn around, really you have to get drilled down, and it's like rethink what you're thinking, because what you're thinking is true and right, and the pursuit you're on is not taking where you want to go or helping you to become who you want to be. And so you need to rethink that and turn that around. And Martin Luther says that's the story of all of our lives. The first of his 95 theses nailed to the Wittenberg door in the 1600s was, all life is repentance. It's like every day, I'm confronted. Mike Tyson, he's the one who said, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. And every day it's like, whoa, hey, and you're going to like, oh, I need to rethink my thinking. This plan, my view of how things should work or what's going to bring satisfaction isn't working. I need to rethink that and change direction. All life is, for the wise person, really then, I think, becomes that. So it's a matter of just waking up day by day and saying, man, I'm out of step with reality, apparently. Proverbs 14:12 there in your talk notes on the screen here, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, man, you get socked right in the chops. In the end, he says it leads to death. And it doesn't matter how sincere you are. Sincerity isn't the measure of whether it is true, good, or right, or real. Thinking that and believing it to be so doesn't make it so. And so you hear this question all the time, what is a woman? And people, they're confounded with it. They say, it's someone who identifies as a woman. Well, what are they identifying as? What is that? Well, it's someone who just feels like they're a woman, and they are a woman. Supreme Court, the latest Supreme Court nominee. They asked her that at her confirmation hearing. Can you define a woman? And she said, well, someone who identifies as a woman, who thinks they're a woman. It makes it so, apparently. But we know it doesn't. And the truth is, she knows it doesn't. But man, you just get swept up with the crowd with, hey, I don't want to be the odd man out. Just swim with the tide, and I'll deny reality too. And in fact, she makes the comment, she said, well, because it's an awkward, because this is not the PC thing to say. I mean, she's a DEI hire. And so she says, well, I'm not a biologist, which really isn't the right answer, because that would infer that actually if there's some sort of biological reality to which you could point, which is the very thing they're denying. And my point is here, you apply this in a million different ways. There's a way that seems right, but it doesn't in and of itself make it right. And so everyone has a worldview, and it's going to spill out into your lives and into your relationships and into your thinking and into your speaking and into your feelings. And so it's this lens. And most people don't think about, what they believe, what their worldview is. And I put in your talk notes here, and I don't remember even where I got who said it this way, but and I put it like under what is a worldview in your notes, a set of hinges on which all our everyday thinking and doing turns. And so here we are. We live in a world filled with data and information and truth claims, and how are we to make sense of it all? Can we make sense of it all? Is there any real reality? Is there any real truth? Is there any solid foundation upon which, I can hold all of this together and sort through it? And so the rest of our time, I just want to go through a short little blueprint that I heard recently from, he's a minister from Australia, and he came into my feed a few years ago, probably back during the lockdowns, where Australia was really draconian, authoritarian. I mean, it was Marxism pedal to the metal when it came to the whole COVID thing and the lockdowns. And that's when I first started listening to him. And I heard him recently, he's talking about, and he's going to lay out sort of this. I tried as best I could to make it into an outline, kind of this foundational blueprint of how to think. What is a biblical or a God's worldview that if we were wise, we should adopt? And he referenced at the beginning of his talk about how he had some students that weren't doing all that well in school, and he thought, well, they could benefit from a little extra tutoring. And so he asked these kids, he said, so what kind of subjects would you like help with? And as they thought about it, one of the kids said, why don't you teach us how to think? And all the other kids, yeah, teach us how to think. I mean, he was shocked by it because he thought they were going to do math, science, or history or something. But he was shocked by it, but pleasantly so, and also disappointedly so, because he realized just how, in our day and age, especially where you're bombarded, there's so much access to information that it's left people swirling and confused. And how do I think about all of this? How do we approach thinking in a way that's smart? And so he said, well, I'll give you a little formula, and I'm going to share it with you here today. And he says you can really look at the very, very first book in the Bible and find a blueprint for this question. How do I know what is true and real, and how does it all hold together? And he said you can start with the first book, first verse in the Bible. We don't need to turn there, because even if this is your first time, in church, you probably know it. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. And so he says, it says, the very beginning of Scripture starts with in the beginning, God. Before God says anything about anything, he starts with himself. In the beginning, God. You want to know how to think right? You want to know how it all holds together? You want to know what the design and purpose for this one brief life of yours is all about. Here's the foundation. It starts with God. And that's how you approach everything in life then, starts with that. You're not just adrift in a pointless and purposeless universe. No wonder people are so mucking around through all the information and data and proposed truth claims. You're not adrift. That life isn't pointless. It isn't purposeless. And it isn't so. Page 1, verse 1, because in the beginning, God. And so, foundation number 1, there is a God, and I'm not him. I start there. And ever since that first lie, that is not so easy to do. That first lie recorded also first book of the Bible. When you disobey God, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, which gives rise to that little quip I've mentioned more than once. The big difference between you and God? He doesn't think he's you. But we struggle with that flipped on its head, don't we? And so it's not just a matter of starting with God, but he also goes on to say in Genesis 1:1, we're given some crucial information, facts about God. In the beginning, God, he did something. He created. So there is something instead of nothing because there was some intelligent first cause, uncaused cause of it all, which would be God, which is what led me to really my search for God. Because, back listening and living with the Doobie Brothers, I couldn't help but think, why is there something instead of nothing? Why is that? How is that? As one guy I've referenced before says, so you're telling me that nothing plus no one equals everything? That couldn't make sense. I was a C student because the teacher didn't have the guts to give me the D's I deserved. I had to do a lot of remedial makeup work after high school. But one thing I didn't have to do remedial makeup work on was, nothing plus no one can't mean everything. So it's not just that there's a God, but there's a God who's done something, who's created the world, and he ordered it. And he gave it its purpose. And we see that when it comes to the pinnacle of his creation, first book of the Bible. So God created human beings in his own image. In his own image, he created them, male and female, both reflecting some aspect of the nature and the image of God. Indispensably so. You can't write that off and wish it away and dream it away and claim it away. And then he blessed them and he said, here, you're going to be my co-regents. I created you for something. Life has a purpose and meaning. I've designed it for something. So it starts with me and it starts with what I've done. And I said, the Christmas Eve, that Jesus isn't the reason for the season. He's the reason for everything. And we read from Colossians where it says, for by him all things were created, things in heaven and earth, visible and invisible. All things were created by him and for him. There is a purpose. You have the verse there. I put it in your talk notes actually as well. And he's before all things, and he's in him. And you want to know how all things hold together? How to make sense of it all? And in him all things hold together. And so, obviously, where are you going to begin? If you're going to gain any clear insight, see clearly about how to make sense of it all, then you've got to start with him. You got to go to him. And so if you're working in your talk notes, the first fill in the blank is, he points to himself, and secondly, to what he has done. That's foundational. Proverbs tells us that in similar words. Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Proverbs 9:10 says, the fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One results in good judgment, or some English translations might say, in understanding. And so probably the last fill in the blanks if you're working in your talk notes. And you can just pretend like you are. I mean, you just fake me out. It makes me feel like, it was worth the effort I put into it. Knowledge is, how to think. What's true. And wisdom is then how to apply that to my life. How do I live? And what King Solomon says here is that it begins with the fear of the Lord, which is problematic, troublesome for many people, because we tend to think of fear, and rightfully so, because it often refers to just such fear that makes you want to run from something that could harm you or hurt you, someone who would hurt you. So the fear of the Lord is like, he's out to get you. And the truth is it couldn't mean that. The psalmist would say in Psalm 130, and I put it in your talk notes, Lord, hear my voice. Do I have this one in your well, thank you. That's very good. That was nice of you to say that you noticed they were in the talk notes. Appreciate that, and I'm encouraged. Do you have this? Did I put that on the screen? I did. So let's read it together. I'll read aloud, and you read quietly. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ear be attentive to my cry for mercy. This guy's got punched in the mouth, right? He had a plan, and now he needs like every day's repentance. He says, man, hear my cry for mercy. But this is what he knows about the Lord. He says, if the Lord kept record of my sin, or he said, Lord, if you keep record of my sin, Lord, who could stand? But with you there's forgiveness, so that we can with reverence serve you. I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits. And in his word I put my hope. And so here I don't even know, did this translation even talk about the fear of the Lord? Yeah, so there he goes. You're to be feared. I don't know if this translation, I didn't even pay attention to that. But it's talking about the fear of the Lord. You're to be feared because you're such a gracious and good God. Because when my plans go south, as they always do when I live independent from you and I get socked in the mouth, I know that you're the kind of dad I can come running to. And so when Solomon uses the fear of the Lord, he's using it as we saw here as the foundation for wisdom and knowledge. It has to do with holding God in a kind of honor and respect and wonder. That the God who made everything, who spoke it, and then sent his son to redeem us from our brokenness, the kind of honor and wonder and respect he deserves. I don't remember even, this quote maybe came from the late Tim Keller here. I put it in your talk notes about the fear of the Lord. It's life rearranging, joyful awe and wonder before the greatness of who God is and what he has done. And that's at the heart of what this fear of God is. And so the third point here is if all that is true, then we need to orient our lives towards him. Steve Elliott's frustration in counseling and yours in your own life and in those that you care so deeply about have really at its heart this failure, this fundamental failure of putting God at the center of our thinking, of our worldview, of our belief system, starting with him and what he has done, then orienting our lives, submitting our will to that, because it's the foundation for how it holds all together, what it's all about, what is true and what isn't true. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says something similar to this when it says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart, not half of your heart, but think about what you think about, what you really are trusting in. Man, and then adjust that. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and don't put your weight, your confidence in your own understanding. All a man's ways seem right to him, but in the end, you get socked in the mouth. And so he says, verse 6, in all your ways acknowledge him, not a tip of the hat, not this casual Christian thing that we're just so much a part of our culture. We're just the nice, polite, religious people. We acknowledge there's a God, but it doesn't really play that much into the way I live and move and have my being, because it's not really foundational. He says, so in all your ways, make it foundational. Acknowledge him. Start with that. And then he'll make your path straight. He'll train you in the way that you ought to go. And then he says this cautionary phrase in verse 7, don't be wise in your own eyes. Well, why not? Well, because all a man's ways seem right to him. It doesn't take you to who you want to be and where you want to go. And actually, it leads to death. It leads to hell. And so, as we move into 2024, we think about, okay, I'm going to turn this ship around. Man, if we don't, dig down into some of the things that we often don't reflect on, what I really believe to be true about life. And that's why sometimes, when we hit a wall, and we find ourselves struggling, we think about it and react to it in ways that, well, they don't include God and his design and his eternal purposes. And we suffer for it. And so trust in the Lord with all of your heart. There's a way that seems right to a man, and it just leads to death. And all of us, I think, can look back to a time where we could say, man, how could I have been so dumb? Ever done that? Ever thought that? If you haven't, then clear out. You're wasting your time here. This is the remedial service. Yeah, I think we all can relate to that. We all have that in common. All of us have in common some occasional, maybe not so occasional, dumb decisions. Many that embarrass us, and I'll share one in a moment, but many others that actually leave us scarred. You know what else we have in common? We have in common that we're really good at self-deception, that we can make lame decisions that we know are lame decisions, but when we massage it enough, we can make it seem sensible, right? Guys, you ever tried this with your wife? Maybe wife with your guy. It's like convince yourself that a poor financial decision is actually an investment. That brand new hunting four-wheeler, I'm going to use it all the time. I'll probably rent it out. We'll probably be making money. We're masters at it, right? We can make a poor relationship decision. Well, he needs to know Jesus, and I'm going to try to point him towards the Lord. Yeah. Sometimes it's embarrassing. Sometimes it leaves scars. Some of our greatest regrets started with, I think, a choice that we had to convince ourselves that it actually was a perfectly good choice. I know she isn't married to me, but it's just lunch. It's just lunch. The Bible doesn't say you don't eat lunch. Yeah, but it does say that there are foolish decisions and plans that you can convince yourself of that seem like a good plan until you get punched in the mouth. And that was really kind of at the heart of what Andrew looked at last week from Ephesians 4. And it's the same basic idea here. If you have your Bible open there, he says, so, and now Paul's telling them in light of who God is and what he has done, he says, so I tell you, in fact, I'm going to insist on it in the Lord that you must no longer, this is verse 17 of the 4th chapter, must no longer live as those who are far from God, who don't know about him and his love and his care and his plans. He says in the futility, you have these verses? I know you do. Bless your hearts. Thank you again for acknowledging that. I was referring to someone who didn't want to encourage me as much as you. And so where are we? Verse 18? I took the out of the reference there. Verse 18 is there. It says in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is into them due to the hardening of their hearts. It's sort of like, I've got a plan. It isn't his plan, but it's a good plan. And I'm kind of doing my thing, and I think I'm going to get, it seems right to me. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And he says, verse 19, they've lost all sensitivity. And next thing you know, they're kind of lost in sensuality and indulging in impurity and caught up in a greedy life. And then verse 20, he says, that, however, is not the way of life that you've learned when you heard about Christ and you were taught in him according to the truth that is in Jesus. Same pattern basically here, same blueprint. Starts with God and what he has done. He says, you were taught with regard to the former way of life to put off the old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires to be made new in the attitude of your mind. Think about what you really believe to be true about life, about God, about yourself, about people, about life and death, and about everything. In fact, and Andrew pointed this out last week, and so he goes on to say, and the rest of that chapter, man, you got to think about orienting your life in light of who he is and what he's done, and who you are in him. It should impact how you speak and how you deal with anger, which is so natural, and the devil who wants to destroy you, and the value of being productive in life and doing things that are useful so that you can share with other people because it's why you were made. And so he basically says the same thing here. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, beginning of knowledge. It starts with God and what he has done. And it starts with the fear of the Lord, holding him in awe and wonder and respect, giving him the due reverence that he deserves, that you desperately need. And I've said this many times this way, and I like the sound of it. He needs you to trust him. And you need you to trust him. And so Genesis 1, gives us this blueprint. And I'll give you just an example, a couple examples here, put them in your notes, and I'm not going to get very deep into them at all. And you can follow up on this in your small groups. But in Genesis 1:1 and Proverbs starts with look to him. And Jesus is asked a question about divorce in his day and age where it was like free and easy. I mean, people had rationalized why they could just push their wife aside and get a newer model. And so he's asked about it. And now in our day and age, if you were to ask about it, you're likely to hear things like, well, be true to yourself. Follow your heart. Do what's right for you. If you're not feeling it, well, maybe it's time to move on. Live your truth rather than starting with God, which is where Jesus started, just like Genesis 1:1. He says, don't start with yourself. That starts with yourself, trying to find the truth in your own best thinking, in your own desires and passion and all that confusion. He says, choose God as your starting point. And he actually goes, the scriptures gives us many examples of that, and I can't take the time for that because you finished this sermon before I have, and I want to catch up. But there's also gives us some, what do they call them here? Cautionary tales. You'll see this very thing that Jesus talks about in Matthew 19 flipped on its head in Romans 1, where the word of criticism for those who don't have a biblical worldview, don't start with God. He calls it ungodliness. And he'll say they refuse to keep God in their knowledge. They refuse to act accordingly. Exact opposite of the basis for a worldview that is true and good and eternal and will serve your best interest and God's great purposes for you. And so you start with God. And you start with the manufacturer. Why is that such a surprise? Why would you not start with the manufacturer? If you're in doubt and you have questions, consult the book, the maker, the designer. So I fired a kiln load of pottery here just before Christmas because I thought, well, I'll get a few Christmas gifts out of this, and it's kind of fun. And so I was programming the little electronic program station on that sets the temperature, and then it gives you some other options. But I don't know a lot about the other options because I didn't read the book. Because, did I mention I got CDs in high school? I did see some things that other people have done. And so, okay, you have a picture of don't show that yet. So there are different temperatures that clay responds to and glazes respond to. And so I'm firing mid-range. Are your eyes rolling back in your head yet? No, they will soon. At mid-range, so the temperature's around 2,240 some degrees, which is white hot. And it can go higher, but I'm not firing with the clay that was designed for that, or the glazes. And I tried some new glazes, man. I kind of went out on a limb and got some pretty cool stuff, and I was excited to try it. And then I thought, well, I'm firing at cone 6. A cone is, so show me, you have pictures of the cones here? They refer to it as like cones. You got the cones. Let's see if you have the cone. No, not that one. That one. Okay, so here, they call these witness cones. So like cone 6 would be the one in the middle. So when you get to a certain temperature, these cones are manufactured to respond at different temperatures, to give you a witness of what temperature it actually got to. And so the one that melted all the way down would have been cone 5, so it's hotter than a 5, and then a 6 is like just right, and then 7 is like, okay, if it's been in a little bit, you're kind of in the sweet spot there. And so I put in cone 6. Did I tell you to go to that picture yet? No, go ahead, go to that picture. I just wanted to be in control. So I put in cone 6, and I think like, okay, you know what I'm going to do? Because I know some people, like I read a little bit about what other people did. They'll put like a 10-minute hold at the top there, and maybe crystals will develop a little bit or whatever. And so I thought like, I don't know. I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'll do a 5-minute hold. And I ain't ever done a hold before. And so I put in 5.00. And then I opened the kiln, and everything's melted together. This is all the colors are like mud, brown, ugly. My shelves are ruined with glaze that ran everywhere because it turns out, you know what it turns out? There's a difference between 5.00 and 0.05. So I sent a picture of this disaster to the people who sold it to me, and I'm going to get to the bottom of this. There's a problem with what you sold me. And then, you know what my wife did? She got on that YouTube and looked at the manufacturer how to program that. And I just walked by, she was looking at it, and I thought, oh, 0.05. And now, I've got this to remind me. You know what someone told me? And these things are flat, so who knows what cone it got to. But I know I'm out shelves. And a whole kiln full of pottery. Someone told me, study shows that people only, a week later, people only remember 5% of a sermon. You say, well, why do you preach so long? Well, I'm kind of fighting against the odds. No. But I'm going to increase the odds of that for 4 of you or 5 of you because I left some of those ugly mugs down there that are failures. And if you want to grab one, then when someone says to you, they go like, what's with that ugly mug? And you go, excuse me? I was born with this. My mom, no, not the one you're drinking with, the one you're drinking out of. What's with that ugly mug? And you'll remember maybe 10%. And so, Father in heaven, we launch into another year, and another year is not unlike all that preceded it or the ones that, if you're gracious enough, will follow it, where all life is repentance. It just comes down to like rethinking our thinking, and not just plodding into the future, hoping for different results, but repeating the same thing over and over again because our plan seems right to us, and because we just haven't put first things first and put you first and started with you and what you've done, and that you need us to trust you and that we need to trust you and orient our lives around your truth, your eternal truth. So thanks for this reminder. Thanks for this day. Thanks for loving us. Let's stand together.
We worship the God who was. We worship the God who is. We worship the God who evermore will be. Well, he opened the prison doors. He parted the raging sea. My God, he